welcome to the stream.
Boom.
And
What's going on?
Good to be here. Hi, guys.
hi, how you doing today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
We're good. Could you start just by giving us the high level pitch, introduce yourself and the company, or the project? How do you refer to it?
Sure. Jan Sramek, I founded California Forever almost 10 years ago at this point. And we are building the next great American city. And so we own about 100 square miles of land, grazing land, basically, just outside of San Francisco, about half an hour east of Napa, halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento. And what we're doing here would have been the least controversial project in California in 1960, when we still used to build stuff. But somehow today it's become controversial. But now it's really kind of going full steam in the last few months. So now we have a couple of local cities moving to approve the new city. And then last week, we introduced a proposal to build the Solano shipyard, which would be the biggest shipbuilding complex in America to help with the shipbuilding crisis that the whole country is trying to solve right now.
I mean, that sounds like pretty industrial. Is that important to have like an industrial plan and really like jobs growth engine? Because when I first heard about this, I was like, oh, it's like halfway to Napa. This will be just luxury mansions for people who have a place in Tahoe and also have a place in San Francisco, and they'll go out there on the weekends. But it sounds like you're planning for something much more ambitious than just a retirement community for liquid tech people.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I really started the company 8 years ago when it became clear that we were going to need basically what Silicon Valley used to be. I mean, you look at what the Valley used to be all the way through the 80s. It was primarily hardware, right? Until 1985, the biggest employer in the Valley was Lockheed Martin. It wasn't Microsoft, it wasn't Oracle. And so the focus from the beginning was, a bunch of really high quality housing, great walkable neighborhoods, but also how do you go back to what the Valley used to do, which was make planes and microchips and radios all the way back at the day. I mean, that was 8 years ago, but I think if you look at what's happened in the country and in the world over the last 8 years, that's kind of just supercharged that whole effort. And so when we came out here and introduced the project about a year and a half ago, we said that we would want to bring particularly advanced manufacturing and aerospace and defense to Solano County. And it kind of got lost in a lot of the media coverage, but that's been the focus since the beginning.
Has the controversy, which is a seemingly silly controversy, especially for our audience, because the idea that we should just build more housing and advanced manufacturing just seems like should be agreeable with every American. But do you feel like the controversy has actually maybe been beneficial at all in the ability to sort of like attract independent thinkers, people that otherwise, if it was still the 1960s and everybody was just pro building and new cities, maybe it would have been harder to recruit, just like truly exceptional talent to join the team and the sort of movement. Maybe it wouldn't have been in the 60s. Maybe it wouldn't have been. I think about California Forever as somebody who, grew up in the Bay Area and in Sonoma County. And, I think about it as like very exciting, very ambitious, and like, something like very worthy of a ton of investment. But back in the 60s, it would have been, okay, a lot of people maybe thought that they should create another city or something like that.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's a great question. I think you're the first person who asked it, but we've definitely seen it, which is a similar thing that I think you've seen with early Anduril and early SpaceX, where if the whole world is saying, hey, this is a dumb idea, you can't build a new defense company in 2016, and you can't build a rocket company in, 2004, 2005. We've definitely seen that the people who want to come and work on it are people who really believe. And it shows, right? It shows in the quality of the talent that you can get. And it is ironic in that if you proposed this in 1960, there were a ton of these happening all over the country. I mean, Irvine is a great example in Southern California, right? Irvine is a city of 300,000 people. There's 250,000 jobs on Irvine. They have more jobs than they have working age residents. It's one of the safest places in America, some of the best schools. It is different kind of a place. It's the best in class suburban community, if you want, but not what we're trying to build. But a huge success. That was started in, I think, 1962. And there was zero controversy about it in the beginning. And same thing happened in other parts of the country, but it's kind of an old idea that we used to have, and then we forgot it as a country, and then everyone is shocked that people can't afford to live anywhere because we stopped building stuff.
What is the roadmap for actually building a new city? I mean, it sounds like there's a corporation here. You've raised money. There's investors, and at some point they might want a return on their investment. What steps do you have to? What steps have you done? What steps do you still have to realize? And then it sounds simple to just go and build a city in some ways, because it's, there are companies that their whole job is building houses or building buildings. There are companies that need buildings to live in, or people to live in. And like all of that makes sense. But then there's something that's still really hard. What is that thing?
Yeah, I mean, I describe it as, I think someone coined the term complex coordination startup.
Yeah.
There's no breakthrough here, right? We're not trying to make a rocket fly. We're not trying to cure cancer. We know all of the steps. You just have to put them together really, really well and finance it correctly and execute on it. And we do build new cities in America, not in California largely, but we build them in Texas and Arizona. We just don't call them new cities. We call them master planned communities.
Yeah.
Now the difference is they are largely residential, and they don't have manufacturing or jobs and so on, but we do build them. I kind of compare the company to a biotech company, which basically has three distinct stages. The first one is you kind of invent the drug. The second one is you go through the clinical trials, and then you get it approved, and then you commercialize it, right? You sell it. And for us, the three distinct stages was, the first one was to buy the land. And so I spent 7 years very quietly raising money and buying the land. And in the end, we bought about 60. Sorry.
One question, maybe you're about to say this, but were you piecing together like tons of different properties? Like, imagine there's not 100 square miles just sitting there like, hey, you want to buy this?
For one price.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish that would have been easier. No, it took 7 years, 200 individual transactions, 700 individual sellers. And so it was probably the most successful, I think, land assembly in the history of the country. But yeah, it took 7 years to put it together. Very long process. And then, so that's kind of phase one. Phase two is what we're going through right now, which is the planning and the permitting.
Yeah.
And so we're doing both the actual planning of how do you design an incredible new city, and how do you combine the old and the new in the best possible way to create a great quality of life. And that's going to take us about another 2.5 years. And then we are hoping to break ground in 2028. And from there on, it's kind of the third phase in a biotech context, if you want, which is basically build and sell. And you start out slow, and the first year we'll probably build 500 homes, and then the second year you build more. And eventually you're building thousands of homes every year. And all of the accompanying industrial space and retail and commercial space and so on. And really the vision is to build a city that actually looks pretty old school, at least in terms of on the surface. I mean, a place that looks very much like some of the most beloved neighborhoods in America, like at a smaller scale, Charleston, South Carolina, or Savannah, Georgia. And then as the city grows and becomes bigger, Chicago, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Georgetown.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear that, because in many ways, like the classic thing in tech is, it's not like you've maybe built like 10 cities before. And so to come in and say like, oh, we're going to reinvent the city and just completely redesign everything. And I've had this theory for a while that like suburbs are like nice in a lot of ways. I live in a small like gated community. There's like 100 something homes. It's like generally well run. I like my neighbors. I have friends that don't live in suburbs yet, and they like tell me like, I just want to live somewhere that's like safe and community oriented. And
why doesn't this exist?
Yeah, why doesn't this exist? And I'm like, there's we were sort of like, I feel like as a sub 30-year-old, my generation was like just against this idea of totally suburban living. Yet the idea to live like just outside of a major industrial area with like-minded people that has like family values and things like that is actually fantastic. So I guess like did you know from the beginning that this sort of like historical concept of a city, it was like pretty good, right? Like you're talking about like Charleston, right? Like it's not like did Charleston like have it figured out, whenever they like created the city, or did it sort of naturally evolve into that state? And how did your thinking shift at all from the beginning of saying, oh, we need to completely reinvent this, or the right model already exists and we need to sort of emulate that in some way?
Yeah, I was pretty much in the camp of we know how to do this, we just need to do it again. And so my take is that there's a tremendous amount of wisdom in how we design cities. And I mean, we've been building cities for 10,000 years, right? It's not like iPhones. And so to come in and be like, I'm going to design a better phone, that's pretty reasonable, right? We've been building phones for 20 years, so you can kind of say, I'll do it better. Also, the technology of what you can do has changed, and so it opens up new possibilities, right? Same with a car. But with a city, like you can do some smart things in it, but at the end of the day, it's a bunch of buildings and parks and schools and shops and businesses, and we've been doing it for 10,000 years, not in this country, but elsewhere. And so I think it's pretty arrogant to come in and say, we're going to redo all of this and do it from scratch. And I think a lot of the backlash against tech coming in and saying, we're going to invent how to do cities comes from that. People just saying,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? And then particularly you have these images of steel and glass and everything is a skyscraper. It creates this very alienating human environment where people don't really like living there. And so I was pretty, and I also came into this after 10 years of living in the old York and the old Cambridge and London and Zurich and Manhattan and the old parts of San Francisco. And so I was pretty charmed with those places. And so from the beginning, that was the idea. And I think in particular, we are pretty excited about this intermediate, people call it now gentle density or missing density, where right now what we have in America is you have mostly single family subdivisions. And then you have 6-story buildings where you live in a small studio or a one-bedroom apartment. And if you have kids and you want some space for them to run around in the garden, tough luck. And we don't really build anything in the middle. And I kind of think that the magic happens in the middle. And that's why those neighborhoods are so charming, right? Because you can have a row house and you can have a backyard so your toddlers can run around in the backyard. But then the plot sizes are small enough that if you want to walk to a restaurant or your kids to school or to a coffee shop, or you just want to go out at 6 p.m. and walk over 5 blocks and see your friend and have dinner with them, you can do it. And that's the sweet spot that we are really excited about. And so for us, most of the magic is 2 to 5 stories, row houses, small apartment buildings, what's called small parcel fabric. So every house is a little bit different. It has that old charm that you see in the Marina or in Noe Valley locally in San Francisco. And we've basically stopped building those neighborhoods. I think they are really magical, and that's what we're mostly going to be building.
Can you talk about the potential impact of a single new city with, specific ideals, right? You talk about, when I think about, you have 100 square miles, you're going to have, I don't know how many residents, but if you have thousands of homes, it's, be a tiny percentage of California's population, but could theoretically, meaningfully, impact like a bunch of different metrics. Can you talk about like what you think success is? Obviously like a new city that's thriving, has a local economy, a bunch of happy residents, families, people that, generations that grow, old there. But what does kind of success look like across, whatever metrics you're sort of thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, at a very micro scale, my personal goal. So we have a couple of young kids and another one on the way. And my personal metric. So we'll move in the first house in the city. And my wife has given me the goal of the first one has to go to school in the new city. She said preschool. I think that's going to be a push now, but we'll try for school. I think success is if kids can walk to school alone. That's a pretty big one. And I kind of think of kids as they basically indicate the species, right? Like if you have a city where your kids can walk to school alone, it says a lot about the city. It says a lot about how close things are. It says a lot about safety. It says a lot about kind of neighborhood relations, and you feel enough trust in the system that they're not going to get abducted, and police works and all kinds of stuff works basically. So that's it at the very micro level. And then at the very macro level, I think there's a cultural moment in California where the state is kind of waking up from a few decades of not building very much. And I think when the history of the state gets written in 40 years or 50 years, and they're talking about this kind of turning point in cultural attitudes and how the state kind of went back to what made it work for a century, I would like California Forever to be a footnote in it and say, well, one of the things that happened in this moment was this project, and it kind of galvanized and helped rethink the attitudes towards growth in California. It very much feels that way. It feels like, at least to me, it feels like a bunch of people left during COVID and they went to other places. And then they kind of learned the shortcomings of other places, let's just say
Yes.
that. And they realized that when nature or the Almighty or whatever was creating California, it was creating the planet. It kind of got a unfair share of all of the advantages.
Yeah, can you-
Pretty hard.
Prodigal
Can you-
son returns to
Yeah. So
California.
can you, so growing up in the Bay Area,
Yeah.
I watched as San Francisco basically got worse every single year for like, as I became an adult, basically. And during COVID, I was in Southern California and I had the same thoughts as everyone else, sort of looking, they said, you can't go to the beach. So I was like, well, if I can't, even go to the beach, why am I here? And everything's closed down. I started like everyone else looking at Zillow and things like that in other states. Decided to stay because I've spent my whole life here and I really believe in California and I want to make it better. But can you talk about the sort of why California is so great? Because obviously, like I can imagine if this model city works, then you could do other states. But you name the company California Forever, so I imagine you would maybe even try to pursue this model in other places in California even. But can you give the bull case for California at a sort of extremely sort of high level, ignoring all the sort of last 20 years of politics and anti-growth and all that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to write history, right? So you write the history of the world and you write the history of America, and then people cross the continent, across all of these perilous deserts, and most of them die. And they get here and they kind of get to this place that just been blessed with geology and climate and all of the stuff. And then obviously the weak didn't make it, and the ill we left along the way or something. So you get this cadre of people who come here who are just basically the self-selected pioneers. And they get to the ocean and then there's nowhere else to go. And so they invent Hollywood and then they invent tech. And we basically create the two industries that have defined the 20th century. And then, unlike with Detroit, those industries happen in a complete natural paradise where you can be skiing versus on the beach in 4 hours. And then the California values and the California ethos defines the 20th century. And then we screw it up because we can't build stuff. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Like, I grew up in post-Soviet Eastern Europe with this vision of California as this place of optimism and opportunity. And then after 28 years of my life, I get here in 2013, and people are throwing rocks at Google buses because we can't build enough housing, which we've known how to do for 10,000 years. And I'm sitting here and like, what the fuck is going on? And then you look at how we designed the housing system, and if you tried to break up a society and make everyone hate each other, you would design the California housing system. Mm-hmm. You would have a fixed housing stock in one of the most desirable places to live in the world, which basically means that you make one person fight against another for housing. And then you have the dumbest industrial policy in the history of America, which is we invent every company worth anything in the country, and then we force them to leave the state. It's insane.
It is crazy.
It's like we're waking up from a bad dream.
Yeah.
But I think what happened, to your point about COVID, is people went to other states and then they realized all of the problems there and they came back, but they came back with a different attitude. They came back and they said, hey, we've been living here, but we haven't really engaged in politics. Mm-hmm. But we're going to change that now because we looked at all of the other places in America and they are pretty nice, but they're not California. And so we're going to stay, but we're not going to let these radical ideas just destroy the state. And I think that's what you've seen in the next couple of years, and it feels like it's just accelerating. And we're pretty excited to kind of be part of finding the new middle path where you can show that you can build stuff, but you can also build it with California values. But you have to build it. You know that you are not a progressive if there's no progress in your state. and you're not for economic opportunity if the teachers who teach in your school have to work, have to live 2 hours away and commute 4 hours every day. You're just not, and we have to reckon with that.
How do you think about wildfire prevention and protection? I'm sure you guys have thought about it a lot. I live in Malibu. John lives in Pasadena, so we both went through this. And it felt like the Palisades should have been in many ways it should have been more defensible than it was, and there was a lot of reasons that happened. And so I can imagine if you're building a new city from scratch in Northern California, which is fire prone, and just the state has always been fire prone, right? If you look throughout history. And one thing that was interesting about the Palisades, I was talking with a friend, and he said that there was like a commonality between the homes that didn't burn down, and it was like some way that the roof was attached to the siding of the house. And it was just like this one design decision that is like less environmentally friendly. Like it doesn't, maybe hold in cool air as efficiently or something. I actually don't know specifics, but that was like the common ground between all the homes that didn't burn. So when you get to design a city from scratch, like the layout and everything, and then design all the homes from scratch, how do you think about that? If the ultimate goal is to prevent, fire, destruction from fires, and then also make sure the cost of home insurance stays reasonable.
Yeah, so here's a mind-boggling statistic. There isn't a single new neighborhood in California, not one, that ever burned down, ever. No new neighborhood, in the last 20 years, no neighborhood that has been built after roughly 2000 has ever burned down. When there was a big fire in Mission Viejo down in Southern California, when there was a big fire in Santa Rosa, the new master planned communities, the new neighborhoods, have become places of refuge where the firefighters take breaks. And that's because we've tightened up the building code so much in the last 40 years that these new buildings are borderline impossible to burn down. And so one of the unfortunate consequences of the California building regulations is we've made it so expensive and so frustrating to build new buildings that we keep old buildings around for longer than we should. And those buildings burn like nothing. But we will do more than that. We will have the most modern water distribution systems and backups on backups and building materials. But the reality is, even if all we did, what everyone else is doing in new communities, none of them has ever burned down because they are so fire resilient. And the second component of it is one of the reasons for why this site is by far the best place in Northern California to build is it has the lowest exposure to natural disasters of any site within 200 miles. So we own 68,000 acres at this point. It's over 100 square miles. There isn't a single earthquake fault line running through the whole site. It's unheard of. Normally, our engineers tell us you cannot find 3,000 acres.
There was an earthquake in the studio down in LA, like today.
Yeah, we're on the 10th. We're on the 10th floor. We're on the 10th floor of this building. It started shaking. You could hear noises from
right
outside.
Before we went live. It was very funny.
So that's one, and then just on the other two, the whole thing is surrounded by water or grass, which means you don't have the fire risk the same way because there's the trees that normally have all of the combustible load.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing is above floodplain and sea level rise and so on. So it's a pretty cool place to build.
Yeah, you're not at the wilderness interface, as they say.
That's right.
I have a question about Ezra Klein's abundance. It seems like a dramatic shift in potentially like the Democratic platform if he really gets it to take hold. Very pro-growth now. He uses the analogy or the story of the California high-speed rail system as instructive. But his whole pitch is not necessarily burn the government down. We need to be ultra-libertarian, let anyone build. It's much more make the government great again. What is your read on the abundance agenda been? And just kind of give me your take as much as you've dug into it.
I've been he's been writing about it for a couple of years, and I've discussed it with Derek Thompson quite a bit, and I'm a huge fan. I think that the devil is in the details, but to me, whenever people on both sides of the political spectrum are kind of saying the same thing, there's a deep underlying truth at work.
Totally.
And there's some differences between what Mark Andreessen is saying with it's time to build and what Tyler Cowen is saying with kind of state capacity and with what Ezra is saying. but there's an underlying truth at work that they are all kind of getting at. And I think the devil for abundance is going to be in the details. Can they actually simplify the regulations enough? But I do think that California desperately needs a big win in the built environment. Everyone knows that we can build apps and phones and drones here, but people have given up on our ability to build something. We posted this thread on Twitter about the Solano shipyard that we proposed last week that went pretty viral. If you look at the comments, it's fascinating. 99% of the comments that are negative are saying, this is an amazing idea, but California will never let you build it. It's literally, there's like 400 comments that are, maybe 200 are negative. 195 of them are basically saying, great idea, California will never let you build it.
Yeah.
And to your point, they quote high-speed rail.
Yeah.
And so I think California desperately needs to show that we can build again, and have an example for the abundance movement. Like, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
And I can't think of something bigger and better that could do it than California Forever, particularly because we put it in the name. I mean, if California wants to stop being a joke to the rest of the country on our ability to build, we need something that's as big as high-speed rail to reset the conversation. We're not going to reset the conversation by building a bunch of 5-story apartment buildings in San Francisco. Nobody cares across America. We need a big, bold statement, and I think this could be it.
If you had the ability to step into a particular government role with essentially like complete control for a day or some hypothetical, and your choice was a mayor, a governor, or the president, which one would you choose? Like, where does what position or what level of abstraction over our government has the highest ability to act as a lever on housing policy? America tends to focus a lot on the presidency, but I've always wondered, is there an executive order that can fix housing policy? Is there a bill that we should be passing, or is it more at the state level or even more at the local level?
So that's part of the challenge. And I mean, Fukuyama called it vetocracy, and I think Ezra gets into it in the book. None of them alone can do it. I mean, if you look at what we need to build, we need local permits, we need state permits, and we need federal permits. And you could get all the local permits you want, but unless you get the state permits, you can't build it, and conversely. And so we've created this system where you need 25 people to say yes, and if one of them says no, you can't build. And so I think the goal for people like Ezra and the abundance movement, in some sense, is going to be reducing the number of people who can say no. I mean, imagine if you're running a company and to do anything, you needed 25 people to say yes.
Yeah.
You would never ship anything. And none of them, and in many cases, and the CEO didn't have the power to override your head of sales or your head of product. You would never ship anything.
Yeah. 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 It makes sense. One last question for me. You said that you're not building skyscrapers on day one, but as I think of how a city evolves, as it gets bigger and more dense, I actually love skyscrapers, and I love the idea of a city getting more and more vertical as it gets more dense, as it's more economically successful. How do you think about setting up zoning or housing policy, or even just expectations that you're moving into a quaint suburb or mixed use environment on day one, but if this goes really well, yeah, we're putting up the 40-story or the 20 or even the 10-story building. Is that just a cultural thing, or are there regulations that you want to instill from day one to allow the city to scale? Or is it more of like a copy paste strategy, and you think we just need 10 of the same communities all over the state, and that's how we win?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think for a long time we'll be able to replicate it by just growing. I mean, we have 100 square miles. That's twice the size of San Francisco, 5 times the size of Manhattan.
Yeah.
It's bigger than the city of Seattle, or about the size of the city of Atlanta. And if you look at places like Barcelona or Paris or even Chicago, they get to really large populations just with 6-story buildings, and there's a lot to say for that. I think the other part of the question of how do you give people a voice in their neighborhood and what it looks like, I actually like the Texas model for this. So we tried to do this with zoning in California, but it's very unclear who control. I mean, the city council controls the zoning, but like, when should it be changed? And that kind of creates all of these fights that we've been dealing with for the last 10 years. of I moved into a single family neighborhood and I don't want any 4-story buildings here. I think the way to do it is to have a really permissive zoning code that goes all the way up to 5 stories from the beginning, at least. And so, for example, in the city that we've proposed, every parcel can be built up to 5 stories from day one. But then what you do is you allow home builders and residents to control kind of their block or their neighborhood through covenants. And so that's a private contract that can exist on a few blocks that says, when this was built, this was meant to be a lower density neighborhood with buildings going up to 3 stories. But that also means that it's clear who has the power to change it, which means 50% of the people or 60% of the people living there can vote and they can lift it. And that also means that when they do it, they might kind of lose something, and that maybe there's a taller building that looks into their backyard, but maybe their property became more valuable because now you can upgrade it and you can build another story or another 2 stories. And so I think that's a really good way of dealing with it at a neighborhood level that is just much more adaptable to change over time.
Well, when I get there, I'm building down. I'm building 4 sub basements. I'm going to have a bat cave. I'm going down. Everyone else is going to be sitting 5 stories up. I'm going to be 5 stories down. It's going to look like a tiny hut on the roof.
How are you? I don't know. I don't know if we have more time. I know we're 5 minutes over already, but if we have time for one more question, I'm curious if how much you've studied HOAs and all the, my HOA like runs on paper. So if you want to pass anything, it's like they'll like send you something. Everybody has to sign it. Of course, nobody's like, and then like apply your own postage and like get it back to them. And it's a bunch of silly rules. So like building an HOA from the ground up that just effectively, is digital first, uses the internet. Like seems pretty powerful, but I'm curious if you've spent so many people. I mean, it's just like a meme at this point. So many people like, have
I'd love to just hear best practices for HOA design. Like that's an interesting question.
Yeah. And in the context of like an entire city.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the biggest mistake and what's important to get right?
So it's an area that we've done some work on, not a whole lot yet. I mean, that's kind of a little bit downstream. We have a couple of years to figure it out. The question that I've been obsessed about the most is, why does everyone hate their HOA? Just at a very human level, like it always seems like people hate it. Ours is actually fine, but a lot of people hate it. I wonder whether there's something about the appointment of the HOA board that's part of the problem.
I'll tell you my reason.
Are you the president of the
HOA? The president is in the home building business of my HOA, and so if you want to get your plans approved for some reason,
you use him.
It goes super fast. So it's basically like mafia.
But this
style,
is what we like. It's one hand washing the other.
No, we don't. We don't like
when one
that.
hand washes the other.
We don't like that. So that's my personal,
My take on, I mean, and it goes to this. I think there's all kinds of issues with direct democracy that we've tried, but I do wonder whether it could work pretty well with tech at an HOA level, which is a relatively low stakes, like voter fraud and whatnot. Like instead of having a 3-person board, if everyone just had an app and then you hire basically a HOA manager to kind of execute, but you didn't get into the politics of who's on the board and which neighbor they like and so on. And it's like, hey, I want to rebuild my house. Here are the plans. Can you guys vote on it? You've got a month. I wonder whether you could remove a lot of the really complicated social dynamics around it.
The other benefit that I think you're going to have is a lot of neighborhoods have, like the challenge is if you're creating a new neighborhood in a new city from scratch, you can get a bunch of like-minded people that are there for similar reasons at the same relative time, which is very different than somebody that moved into a neighborhood in the 60s, has been retired for 20 years, and their set of priorities is very different than the young family who's coming in today and, maybe paid 10 times more for their house or something like that. And those sort of like competing priorities of somebody who spends all day at home is very different than, a young family who like, is like super oriented around security or something else. So
I have one last question. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say I think there's actually 2 really deep truths in what you said, and the first one is I've heard from a lot of people that's actually what they miss the most about kind of moving into a new subdivision, which is often it was a lot of young families, and so you had everyone was kind of in the same stage of life and they had kids, and it really created a sense of community, and that's harder to find. then the other one is the other kind of exciting thing that came out of COVID was people realizing just how much better your life is if you can live 5 minutes away from your friends or a minute away from your friends. I mean, we lived during COVID, we moved 5 doors down from my sister-in-law, and we just had the best time. It was incredible. And people came back and they said, hey, I'm gonna try to move in close with my friends.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to do it in practice, right? You need
Yeah.
to solve this issue of you all need to find a home in the same neighborhood, and nobody wants to be the first one to jump, and so
And
on.
you're driving up the prices in the
Oh,
neighborhood
exactly.
simultaneously.
And then for a lot of the people who want to do it kind of in tech, you don't always necessarily want to move in like a new subdivision. But I think that's going to be a huge part of who moves into the new city is going to be a bunch of people who live right now, different parts of the Bay Area, and they all kind of like the design aesthetic and will be trying to build.
Yeah.
And they can get houses on the same block. I mean, you could connect. My wife and her sisters have the plan of connecting the backyards.
That's amazing.
So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in this kind of not communal living, but kind of co-living or living nearby with your friends and family. That's going to be pretty cool.
I love it. My last question, have you played City Skylines?
No.
You got to. It's a city builder. It's
All
like
right, all right.
what you're doing
He's
in
playing.
real life.
He's doing the meme.
He's doing it in
though.
real
He's
life.
playing the game.
But it's like the most popular modern version of SimCity. I'm sure a lot of fans will enjoy it. They can play along at home. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah,
I
this
really
was great.
enjoyed it. This was
I'm so
fantastic.
excited. Thank you for. I can't wait for for you to move into your place. It's going to be a 15-year overnight success.
Exactly.
Oh, 100%. Next time you guys should come up and we'll do
Would love
something
to.
on the side once
Yeah,
you've
that'd be
broken down.
fantastic.
Would love
All
to.
right, good
Well,
to see you.
thanks so
All right,
much.
cheers.
Have a great rest of your day.